the percentage of the population who could follow through is minuscule, sad to say. Meanwhile, U.S. and NATO gearing up for a counterattack against Russian forces in July or August, with high risk of escalated retaliatory strikes using EMP or nuclear weapons. No doubt about it. Based on facts that have now been made public, it's clear the U.S. and NATO are gearing up for a massive military counterattack on Russian forces in Ukraine. Based on the idea it takes a few months to build up logistics, hardware, and personnel, the most likely time for this counterattack appears to be around the July-August timeframe. Keep in mind overarching context: to cancel the 2022 midterm by placing America into a world war before November, accompanied by a domestic police state martial law response that now includes an actual Ministry of Truth run by Homeland Security. Some of the information supporting the coming counterattack includes a recent revelation. Military cadets from Ukraine were secretly moved to the U.S. to undergo intensive F-16 fighter pilot training. We understand Ukrainian military teams are undergoing similar training in artillery and tanks. Seasoned military observers point out you can't train an effective F-16 fighter pilot in just a few months, nor a tank commander. Yet this only speaks to the desperation of U.S. and NATO and Ukraine efforts to throw almost anything at Russia in an effort to stop the unstoppable grinding advance of Russian forces across southern Ukraine. In addition, it's clear U.S. and NATO are planning to cobble together a false flag, likely involving chemical weapons, to trigger the internal justification to deploy U.S. troops directly against Russian forces. Adam Kinzinger has introduced the Ukraine war resolution that specifies this exact escalation plan, as we have observed. The timing of the chemical false flag likely sometime in June, allowing the media to whip up outrage and anti-Russia hatred to the point where Americans are screaming for World War III. Falling in line with the engineered outrage, House and Senate members will call for a declaration of war, echoed by the criminal cabal running the fake White House soundstage from the fake president, declaring whatever current state of confusion he's expressing on that particular day. In July or August, we'll be in a full-blown World War III against Russia, with U.S. troops and weapons deployed in Ukraine, facing off against a far better equipped Russian forces, which have very short supply lines back to Russia, compared to the extremely long supply lines from the U.S. to Western Ukraine, not only involve crossing the Atlantic and all of Western Europe, but then navigating Ukraine's blown up railways and destroyed bridges while under heavy fire from Russian air and missiles. As a counterattack gets underway, it's very likely U.S. and NATO will unleash attempted missile strikes, drone strikes, or bombing runs and infrastructure installation in Russia. The objective to cut off Russia's domestic supply of fuel, steel, ammo, and so forth. This move would clearly cross the line, forcing Russia to realize this war is an existential threat against the survival of Russia as a nation. It's only exacerbated by admission from high-level Pentagon officials deliberately trying to weaken Russia and destroy Russia's ability to wage war. Russia will quickly reach a conclusion it must retaliate with strikes with something more than mere cruise missiles and artillery. We can't read Putin's mind, but no doubt he's already realized sooner or later he needs to take out the U.S. supply chain to stop the flow of weapons and military training. The U.S. is now threatening China, interestingly, with economic sanctions if China supplies weapons from Russia. So according to the U.S., only Ukraine can be augmented with weapons, but not Russia. Since Russia has vastly superior ICBMs, such as the new Sarmat-2, with up to 15 multiply independent entry vehicles and hypersonic glide vehicle capability, Russia has the ability to launch a single ICBM that can create nuclear strikes on 15 U.S. cities all at once, with little or no risk of interdiction by U.S. forces. An open-air nuclear strike in the Western Hemisphere, however, would contaminate the entire hemisphere with radioactive fallout and therefore would drift all across Russia as well. From their point of view, therefore, a safer option is to detonate a high-altitude EMP, destroying the U.S. power grid and plunging the U.S. into chaos and collapse. That such an EMP strike would utterly disable America's military supply chain while achieving something on the order of 90% civilian casualties within 1 to 2 years. Surely Russia knows America's power grid is not hardened against EMP, and that America's finance system, food stamp, communication, fuel delivery, nearly everything else depends on the power grid. An EMP strike is thus the most efficient way to disable America and even collapse a nation. Once you recognize this, you also realize EMP might also be used against other NATO nations, such as the UK. An EMP against London or Paris or Berlin would plunge the entire nation into darkness and collapse. Thus, we believe EMP weapons would be the first strike weapons preferred by Russia in retaliation to NATO and US forces. We pray it never takes place, but it looks as though Biden and his insane handlers are pushing the United States into this scenario. You might think Russia would never use EMPs. They might fear nuclear retaliation, but Russia has another secret weapon held in reserve: the underwater submarine drones with 100+ megaton warheads. These underwater drones have already been positioned off the coast of the US and the UK, awaiting detonation commands from low-frequency satellite communications. They are publicly known to carry 100 megaton warheads, but Russia, he's told, actually has 200 and even 300 megaton warheads in these units. Once detonated, they unleash tidal waves of radioactive ocean water, drenching coastal cities, making the region uninhabitable for at least 3 centuries, 300 years. With one detonation, Russia could destroy Washington, D.C., New York City, including Wall Street, military ports in Virginia, and other major cities on the East Coast. In fact, a Russian TV station is now openly bragging about this capability. The reason they're doing that is to let the U.S. know how serious it is that Russia can do this, which no Western representative appears to be willing to acknowledge. A recent Russian state TV program has stirred outrage, featuring a simulated demonstration of how the Russian Navy nuclear demonstration would take out the UK with ease. It approaches its target at a depth of 1 kilometer at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour. There's one way to stop the drone. The warhead has a yield of up to 100 megatons. The explosion of this thermonuclear torpedo will cause a gigantic tsunami wave up to 500 meters high. 500 meters high. The UK could be turned into a radioactive desert in the most provocative moment of the program, he observes. Such a barrage alone also carries extreme doses of radiation. Having passed over the British Isles, it will turn what might be left of them into a radioactive desert. The problem is these boastful claims are not hyperbole. Russia has the weapons to back it up. They're already positioned off the coast of the US and the UK in preparation for precisely such a scenario. Putin is doing his best to tell us what awaits us if we provoke the bear, and we're doing it anyway. Joe, this insanity is mind-boggling.